There's something about driving through the woods at night that feels wrong, even if you can't explain why. Maybe it's the way your headlights barely carve a path through the darkness, or how the trees seem to lean in just a little too close. Maybe it's because deep down we know that once we leave the glow of streetlights behind, we're on our own. Locked doors and high beams can't stop what watches from the shadows. These are 6 real stories from people who dared to drive through the dark and learned why some roads were never meant to be traveled alone. Story 1. Phantom Dogs on the Delivery Route. I've been doing DoorDash part-time for a while now, mostly in the evenings after I finish my regular 9 to 5. It's not glamorous, but it helps cover the bills, and to be honest, I've come to appreciate the quiet of night driving. Less traffic, more peace. That particular Tuesday night started off just like any other. I was already a little tired from work, but when I got a ping for a pickup at one of my regular spots, a Mexican place I'd delivered from dozens of times, I didn't think twice. The order was sizable, around $75, and to my surprise, the customer had included a $25 tip up front. That alone made the whole trip feel worth it. The delivery address was about 15 minutes outside of town, further than usual, but I'd done rural runs before. In my experience, people who live out in the sticks tend to be more generous tippers. They know it's a bit of a trek. The restaurant had the order ready almost immediately, and the estimated delivery time was listed as 10:15 p.m., giving me more than enough time. I wasn't thinking about anything except getting there, dropping off the food and heading home. The first half of the drive was uneventful. Just your typical county roads lined with fields and fences. But when I turned off the main road onto the address's route, everything changed. The trees swallowed the road, and with no streetlights in sight, it felt like I'd driven straight into a tunnel of pitch black. The further I drove down that narrow, unlit road, the more uneasy I felt. My headlights barely cut through the dark, and the trees on both sides pressed in so tightly that it felt like the forest was closing around me. According to Google Maps, I had about 4 miles left to go. That's when it happened. Out of nowhere, a large white blur darted into the beam of my headlights. A dog. It wasn't just any dog either. This one had an unusual, almost regal look to it. Tall, lean, with a long snout and flowing white fur. I'd later look it up and find out it was Borzoi, a breed I'd never seen in real life. I slammed on the brakes hard, heart pounding, but I felt the thud, soft but unmistakable. I knew I'd hit it. Panicking, I pulled over and jumped out with my flashlight already sick with guilt. I've always loved dogs, and the idea that I might have seriously hurt one made my stomach churn. But when I checked the road, there was nothing. No body, no blood, not even a tuft of fur. I searched the ditches on both sides, called out, even waved my flashlight into the trees. It was like the dog had vanished into thin air. I stood there for a minute, confused and rattled, before, checking the time, 9:55 p.m., I was still on track for the delivery. Trying to shake off the feeling, I got back in my car and drove the rest of the way in silence, glancing in the rearview mirror more often than I'd like to admit. The customer's house was at the end of a long gravel driveway. The porch light was on, and the man who answered was friendly and polite, even thanked me for coming all that way. On the surface, it was a routine delivery, but something about that road and that dog gnawed at the back of my mind. I had no idea the night was far from over, and that what I'd seen was just the beginning. I left the customer's house around 10:20 p.m., trying to shake off the lingering tension from earlier. The drive back meant retracing the same route, through the same winding, tree-shrouded road where I'd seen that white dog. As I approached the area where I thought the impact had occurred, I instinctively slowed down. My eyes scanned the roadside, the woods, the shadows. That's when I saw it again, right there in the middle of the road. Same dog, same long limbs, Same flowing white coat. It stood perfectly still, illuminated in the full glare of my headlights. I brought the car to a complete stop, about 30 feet away. My hands tightened around the wheel. My mind scrambled for answers. How? I knew I'd hit it. And if I hadn't killed it, surely it would have limped off. Yet here it was again, as if waiting for me. For a moment we stared at each other, me and that dog. Then, against every ounce of common sense, I opened the door and stepped out. I told myself maybe it was injured. Maybe it needed help. Maybe I was overreacting. But as I took a cautious step forward, the dog turned and trotted off into the woods, quiet, graceful, unbothered. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. That's when I turned back toward my car and froze. Lined up in a perfect row between me and the driver's side door were 6 more white dogs, all identical, all staring at me. They didn't move. They didn't blink. They just stood there, spaced apart with such eerie precision it looked manufactured, like someone had positioned them there with a ruler. A wave of terror surged through me. My thoughts scattered. I couldn't even hear them breathing. The silence was suffocating. I couldn't understand what I was looking at. Dogs didn't behave this way. They weren't natural. They were too still, too symmetrical. And then, without warning, they lunged. All 6 of them at once, growling, teeth bared, rushing toward me like they'd been waiting for the signal. I screamed, loud, desperate, shielded my face with my arms, expecting to feel claws, teeth, pain. But nothing came. The air fell silent again. Slowly I opened my eyes. The road was empty. My car sat untouched. The dogs, gone, like they had never existed. I scrambled back toward the car, heart racing, fumbling for my keys. But the doors were locked. My car auto-locks when I step away with the fob in my pocket, and now my hands were shaking so bad I could barely fish it out. That's when I heard it. The rapid patter of paws hitting pavement, behind me, running straight at me. I caught the heavy, unmistakable scent of wet, dirty dog, thick and sour. The hairs on my neck stood up. I clicked the fob, yanked the door open and dove inside. I slammed the lock button just as I turned to look. But of course, there was nothing there. I sat there in the driver's seat, panting, trying to catch my breath as my heart pounded like a war drum in my chest. I kept glancing in every mirror, half expecting those pale dogs to emerge from the tree line or appear behind the car again. But nothing happened. The road was empty, still and silent, like the whole thing had been a hallucination. I didn't dare stop driving until I made it all the way back to town. Even then, I checked my rearview mirror every few seconds, just to be sure. When I finally got home, I inspected my car, expecting to find some kind of damage, fur caught. In the bumper, claw marks, anything, but there wasn't a scratch. No dents, no smudges, no trace of impact from earlier. I kept trying to tell myself it had all been in my head. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing, stress mixed with exhaustion, a vivid trick of the mind. But that didn't explain the smell, so real, so pungent, or the synchronized movement of those dogs, or how they vanished. That night I barely slept. For days afterward, I kept replaying the moment in my mind, their formation, their eyes, the way they lunged. 2 weeks later, I got another delivery order. Same customer, same road. This time the tip was even bigger. I hesitated before accepting it. I really did. But greed, or maybe curiosity, got the better of me. I told myself I wouldn't get out of the car no matter what. The drive was quiet. I didn't see anything strange, no ghost dogs, no noise, nothing. But when I handed the food to the guy, I couldn't help but blurt out, "Is this road haunted?" He didn't laugh. He just gave me a tired nod and said, "So, you saw the share dogs too." Story 2. The Man on Trail 23. It was 2019 and I had just come out of a rough divorce that left me emotionally hollow and financially stretched thin. I was bitter, angry, and ready for a change. So when Montana Fish and Wildlife offered me a transfer with slightly better pay than my old Idaho job, I jumped on it. I'd been working as a game warden for years, and though the pay wasn't much, the job gave me purpose. My father always wanted me to work construction like him and my brothers, but I couldn't stand the thought of building houses for other people to fill with their perfect lives. Being out in the wilderness, alone with the trees and the animals, that was more my pace. The Montana Post came with a modest cabin near a remote management area. It wasn't much, leaky roof, lukewarm water at best. But after spending months crashing on my brother's couch in Boise, it felt like paradise. Isolation was exactly what I needed. There were no neighbors, no traffic sounds, just the wind moving through the pines. I started drinking less, sleeping better, and after a few months I even felt like myself again. The divorce was finalized. My ex got the house, and I got my solitude. By fall, I was down to a 6-pack a week instead of a day. The silence became a kind of therapy. Most of my work was routine, ticketing clueless hunters or tracking wayward hikers, but I didn't mind. Then the reports started. Locals whispered about dead deer turning up in strange spots, carcasses that didn't look like typical predator kills. The cuts were too clean, like someone had taken a scalpel to them. I figured it was just poachers. I didn't know it yet, but those mutilated deer were the first signs that something was very, very wrong in the woods around Trail 23. It started gradually, one deer here, another a few miles away. But these weren't normal predator kills. The bite marks were missing, there were no drag patterns, and in several cases internal organs were removed with unsettling precision. And it wasn't just that. Parts were missing. Some of the deer had been arranged, laid out in strange positions, like someone wanted them to be found. I documented everything, took photos, gathered tissue samples. I planned to send them to the state lab by the end of the week. As creepy as it all was, I chalked it up to a disturbed poacher or maybe someone with a twisted sense of art. That assumption held until one evening in late October. I had just finished up a long day arguing with a rancher who insisted wolves were taking his cattle. Turned out it was feral dogs, but try telling that to a man convinced the government was lying to him. The sun was already setting by the time I packed up the paperwork, and I was starving, thinking more about the leftover pizza in my fridge than any wildlife incident. Instead of taking the highway back, I opted for the shortcut, Trail 23. Just a dirt road, but one I knew well. My truck rocked along the uneven path, and as I rounded a bend, my headlights caught a white pickup parked oddly on the shoulder. It looked almost staged, too clean, too perfectly aligned, like someone had placed it there for effect. I slowed, down and pulled behind it. The license plates were Montana issue, but not local, came from near the Dakota border. I noticed through the rear window that the inside was completely gutted. No seats, just an empty metal floor and scattered tools. And then there were the dark stains, big ones, pooled and dried. My stomach turned as I stared. Mounted on the dash was a high-end camera pointed toward the trail, alongside a neat stack of glossy photographs. I didn't have time to process any of it before I heard a voice from the trees. "Evening, friend," it said. I nearly dropped my flashlight. There was a man standing just inside the tree line, tall, thin, dressed in flannel and jeans. He had his hands in his pockets and a strange stiff posture, like someone pretending to be casual but not quite getting it right. Everything about him felt off. He stepped forward slowly, that unnatural smile still plastered across his face. There was something deeply wrong about it. It wasn't just the smile itself, which was too wide and too toothy. It was the way he held it, like he didn't understand how human expressions worked, like he had studied them in a mirror but never quite mastered them. I kept my hand near my sidearm as he approached, my instincts screaming that something wasn't right. "Having some car trouble?" I asked, even though we both knew that truck wasn't broken down. He paused, tilted his head slightly, bird-like, deliberate. "Not exactly," he said, "just taking a break, admiring the scenery." His voice was calm, too calm, and just like his smile, it sounded practiced. That's when he said something that made my blood run cold. "Night's the best time to hunt. You'd know all about that, wouldn't you? I've been watching you. You're good at tracking, but you missed some things." My spine stiffened. He wasn't talking about general patrol work. He meant me specifically. He continued, "Like those deer carcasses today. You looked, but not deep enough. You didn't check what was missing, what was replaced." My stomach dropped. I hadn't even submitted my report yet. No one else knew about what I'd seen that morning. 3 more mutilated deer, same surgical cuts, but this time something different. Something placed inside them. But I hadn't opened the carcasses. I'd just taken external photos and samples, the way he said it, like he'd been there, like he'd watched me do it. I gritted my teeth. "Why don't you step into the light where I can see you better?" My voice was steady, but my hand was tightening around my holster. He didn't move. Instead, he smiled even wider. "You're not like the others. You notice things. Most people just drive by, but I knew you would stop. That's why I picked this spot." I felt a knot form in my gut. This wasn't random. He had planned this, stalked me, learned my routes, maybe even been inside my cabin. "Messes need cleaning up," he said almost wistfully. "That's what the truck is for. Easier to work when there are no seats. Sometimes they fit in the bed just fine." That was it. I couldn't take any more. I drew my weapon and fired, a warning shot into the air. "On the ground now!" I shouted, taking a firm stance. But he didn't flinch. Instead, he just let out a wheezing laugh, high-pitched and raspy, and stepped backward into the brush. By the time backup arrived, he was gone, disappeared into the forest like smoke. But the truck, that told us enough. Bloodstains, photos, hundreds of them, some of wildlife, some of rangers, some of me. One was taken through the window of my cabin at night. The man wasn't just watching the animals, he had been watching us. The days that followed were a blur of interviews, lab reports, and uneasy silence. The text confirmed what we suspected. Those photos dated back months, some even older. Surveillance shots of rangers, hikers, hunters, all taken from concealed spots across the management area. A few of the photos were especially disturbing. People undressing at camp, crouched behind trees, even families with children. Whoever this man was, he had been studying us like prey. The truck itself yielded more than just blood and photos. There were samples, bags sealed with numbers I didn't recognize, along with torn-up scraps of maps marked with circles and red lines. But the worst revelation came a week later, when the lab called about the deer samples I'd submitted. The organs that were removed from those carcasses had been replaced, not with animal tissue, but with human. Fresh, intact, surgically placed. The working theory was that he had been robbing graves or somehow accessing unclaimed cadavers, but no one could say for sure. There were no open homicide cases that matched the DNA, no missing persons. The man was still out there, and we had no name, no prints, no face, just a voice in the woods and a trail of evidence that made no sense. They increased patrols after that, and for a while I tried to go back to normal. But every time I step into the forest now, I feel watched. Not the way you feel when a deer spots you from the underbrush. No, this is different. This is personal. He knew me. He still might. Story 3. The Crawling Man in the Suit. Back in 2016, I was working late-night shifts for Domino's, delivering pizzas to the more rural parts of town. It wasn't glamorous, but the pay was decent, and the tips could be surprisingly good, especially when you were the only one willing to drive out to the middle of nowhere after dark. That night was nothing out of the ordinary. It was a Friday late, maybe around 10:30 p.m. when the order came through. 2 large pepperonis and breadsticks. The address didn't raise any red flags. I'd delivered out that way before, though. I didn't recognize the specific house number. The road was one of those winding gravel backways where the streetlights stop about 2 miles too early, and GPS always takes a second to catch up. When I pulled up, I found myself at the end of a long driveway with an old 2-story house at the top. It looked aged but well maintained. The porch light was on. A car sat in the driveway. Everything appeared totally normal. I parked, grabbed the hot bag, and made my way up to the door, expecting a quick drop-off and maybe a decent tip. I knocked once, twice, no answer. I waited, knocked again. Still nothing. I could see a few lights on inside through the front window, but there was no movement, no TV sounds, no footsteps. I called the number on the receipt twice, both times straight to voicemail. Standard policy was to wait 5 minutes before leaving. At the time, I had no idea how much those 5 minutes were about to cost me. After a few more knocks and another unanswered call, I gave up. I turned around to head back to my car, a little annoyed but not surprised. Late-night no-shows happened more often than you'd think. Drunk customers, prank orders, or people who just fell asleep. I was halfway down the porch steps when I froze. There was a man sitting in my back seat. I hadn't heard the door open. I hadn't seen anyone walk by. But there he was, legs neatly folded, hands on his knees, staring directly at me through the windshield with the widest, most unnatural smile I've ever seen. He was dressed in what looked like his Sunday best, black suit, white shirt, dark tie, but something was off. His posture was too straight, too rigid, and he didn't blink, not once. He just sat there, smiling like he was posing for a church. Directory photo taken in hell. My immediate reaction was anger. "Hey!" I shouted, storming toward the car. "Get out of there!" But he didn't move. Not a twitch. No change in expression. That smile just stayed frozen on his face, and his eyes never left mine. I fumbled for my key, debating whether to unlock the doors or call the cops. The idea of confronting him up close sent a chill down my spine. As I reached for my phone, I turned away for a second to glance at the house again, then back toward the car. The back door was open. He was gone. No sound, no movement. Just empty seats and an open door swaying slightly in the breeze. I looked around, heart pounding, thinking maybe he'd run off into the woods. That's when I felt the pain, sharp, sudden, on my left thigh. I shouted, stumbled backward, and looked down. He was there, on all fours, crawling like some kind of animal. He had bitten me through my jeans. His face was still twisted in that awful grin, and his eyes never stopped staring at mine, not even once. For a second I couldn't move, just stood there in shock, staring down at this man who was now crouched like a spider, suit dirtied at the knees, hands flat against the ground like he belonged there. He didn't growl, didn't speak, didn't even breathe loud enough for me to hear, just stared up at me with that same grotesque grin. His teeth bared slightly from the bite, as if he was proud of what he'd done. I staggered back, almost falling over myself, and scrambled into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands were shaking, trying to remember if the other doors were locked. I reached behind me and yanked the back door shut so hard I felt something strain in my ribs. For a moment I just sat there staring ahead, panting. Then I remembered. I had called the police. My phone was still in my hand. For a second I considered driving away, just getting out of there and pretending none of it had happened. But then I thought, if I left and the cops showed up, would I get in trouble? Would they think I made it up? I couldn't afford to lose this job over a misunderstanding, so I stayed, engine running, doors locked, every nerve in my body screaming. I looked around for him. Nothing. The driveway was empty. Then I saw movement, low to the ground, fast, jerky, circling the house. He was crawling again, moving like some twisted parody of a human, almost like he'd trained to do it. His limbs bent at strange angles, elbows jutting out too far, knees snapping forward in odd little bursts. He rounded the side of the house and disappeared behind it. I waited, watching every mirror, afraid to blink. Minutes passed, or maybe they felt like minutes. Time doesn't make sense when you're trapped in fear. Then I saw him again, this time closer. He had returned to the edge of the trees, crouched low and still. That same grin plastered across his face, only now it looked wider. He was watching me, but not like a man watches. It was more like an animal weighing its next move. The cops pulled in 2 minutes later. Felt like hours. 2 cruisers, lights on, tires crunching the gravel. As soon as they stepped out, I threw the door open and waved them down, breathless, trying to explain everything in between gasps. They searched the property and found nothing, not a trace. The house, they told me, was owned by a man who matched the general description I gave. But according to their records, he wasn't supposed to be in town anymore. He had no current phone number. The order had been placed online with a prepaid card. I sat there in the back of the cruiser, watching the dark edge of the trees, wondering how something could look so human and still feel so wrong. I ended up going to urgent care the next morning, just to be sure. The bite didn't break the skin. Thank God, but it left a deep bruise that ached for days. The doctor gave me some antibiotic cream just in case and told me to monitor it for swelling or anything weird. I didn't mention that I'd been bitten by a man crawling like an animal in a business suit. What would I even say? The police took my full statement, followed up with neighbors, but no one had seen anything, not even the supposed owner of the house. One of the officers actually asked if I'd been drinking or using something that night. I hadn't. I don't touch that stuff, especially not on the job. Still, there was this sense that no one really believed me. I kept delivering pizzas for a few more months after that, but I started avoiding the outskirts. Eventually, I left that job and got a position at a warehouse, indoors, predictable, and most importantly, nowhere near unlit gravel driveways. The bruise faded. Life moved on. But every now and then, when I'm driving at night and catch a shape in my rearview mirror, or hear something scrape along the side of the car, I think of him, of how he moved, of that smile. That wasn't a man who snapped. That wasn't someone high or sick or desperate. That was something else, and whatever it was, it wanted to be close to me, close enough to bite. Story 4. The stick figure in the lot. For about 3 years, I worked night security at a business park just outside the city. It was one of the better gigs I'd had. Quiet, steady, and surprisingly good pay for the lack of real danger. The layout was simple. 4 office buildings arranged around a central parking lot, each building used by different companies with varying hours. Some were totally dark by 6 p.m., while others had employees working late into the night. My shift was from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 6 days a week. The company issued white Ford Explorers with a generic security logo slapped on the sides, and I was expected to patrol the perimeter every hour on the hour, usually at 11, midnight, 1, 2, 3, and 4 a.m. Just a slow loop between buildings, checking doors and making sure everything looked normal. I didn't mind it. The drives helped pass the time, and I could listen to podcasts or music between stops. Most nights were uneventful, just me, the stars, and the distant hum of the highway. Occasionally I'd catch someone sleeping in their car or a random raccoon rummaging through the trash, but nothing ever serious. The buildings were spaced out enough that you had to drive between them rather than walk, especially in the colder months. I always found the lot a little eerie during the winter, especially around 2 a.m. when the temperature dropped and everything went still. That was always the hardest part of the shift. Your body is running on fumes, your eyes play tricks in the shadows, and your mind starts to wander. But I never felt truly uneasy, not until that night. That night something moved between the cars, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I wasn't the only one patrolling the lot. It was around 2:10 a.m. when I first noticed it, just a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision as I rounded the corner between buildings C and E. D, I'd just finished checking the last set of doors and was headed back toward the far end of the lot when something darted between 2 parked cars. I instinctively slowed the Explorer, eyes scanning the row. My first thought was raccoon, maybe, even a stray cat. But when I turned the spotlight toward the area, there was nothing, just empty spaces and cold pavement. I chalked it up to fatigue. 2 a.m. always messed with me, and continued on telling myself I was seeing things. But then, just as I was pulling around toward the south side of Building D, I caught another glimpse, this time in my rearview mirror. Something tall, impossibly thin, moved across the gap between 2 vehicles behind me. I hit the brakes and turned in my seat for a better look, heart picking up a beat. Again, nothing. But now I felt it, that subtle shift in the air when you know you're not alone. It was like something was watching me from just beyond the edges of the light. I finished the round and parked near the central office, trying to shake it off. But for the next few nights it kept happening. Always around the same time, always between the same 2 buildings. A shadow too tall, too slender, slipping between cars when it thought I wasn't looking. I began to change my route slightly, testing it, circling back at odd angles or parking and killing the lights to watch. That's when I saw it more clearly. The thing didn't move like a person. It glided, jerky but smooth, its limbs long and unnatural. I only ever saw it from a distance, but it looked like a living sketch, a black outline, no texture, no features, like a doodle brought to life. It stayed in the shadows, always just out of reach, always disappearing the second I turned the headlights its way. But it was real. It had a rhythm, a pattern, and it was watching me just as closely as I was watching it. It was the 4th night in a row that I'd seen it, and by then I'd had enough of pretending it wasn't real. I decided I was going to catch it in the act, or at least get a better look. I adjusted my patrol to hit Building D early, around 1:45 a.m., hoping to get ahead of its usual appearance. I rolled through the lot slowly, lights dimmed, one hand on the spotlight, the other ready to flip the brights. The night was cold and windless, the silence thicker than usual. The parking lot was half full, dim orange lights humming overhead, and the buildings stood like sleeping giants around me. I passed by the row where it usually showed up. Nothing. No movement. No shadow. I exhaled, started to turn the wheel. Then, there it was. It stepped out from behind a van about 30 feet ahead of me. For once it didn't dart away, it just stood there, directly in the beam of my headlights. I froze, foot easing off the gas as the creature, if I could even call it that, faced me fully. It was wrong. That's the only word that fits. A pitch-black silhouette, like someone had cut a stick figure out of shadow and pasted it onto reality. It had no face, no clothes, no depth. Just impossibly long limbs, arms that dangled down to its knees, and a perfectly round head perched on a thin, too tall neck. It didn't cast a shadow. It didn't blink or twitch. It just stood there, motionless, as if daring me to look away. My mouth went dry. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I shifted in my seat, never taking my eyes off it. Then, like a puppet yanked by invisible strings, it took one deliberate step toward me. That broke whatever trance I was under. I threw the car into reverse so fast I nearly clipped a sedan parked behind me. I backed away from it, tires skidding slightly on the cold pavement. When I looked forward again, gone, just an empty row of cars. I whipped my head side to side, breathing hard, adrenaline burning in my veins. Then I saw it again, its round head peeking above a nearby van, tilted at an impossible angle, watching me. I slammed the accelerator and didn't stop until I was back at the central office, headlights off, doors locked. I sat there for a solid 10 minutes staring out into the lot, waiting for it to show itself again. It didn't. But the worst part wasn't the thing itself, it was the silence. The total absence of sound even when it moved. Not a step, not a scrape, not a breath. It was like it existed outside of everything I understood. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't patrolling anymore. I was being monitored and not by anything human. After that night, I stopped doing rounds at Building D. I didn't tell my supervisor the real reason, just mumbled something about low tire pressure, and focused on checking the other buildings more frequently. Every time I passed that stretch of the lot, I kept my eyes straight ahead. But I still saw it. Not directly, not like that first time, but in flashes, reflections, the way shadows shifted in the corners of my vision. Sometimes it crouched. Between cars, its limbs bent like a spider. Other times it stood tall behind a tree or pole watching, always watching. I never saw it during the day. I stayed late a few times to test that theory, walking the lot in the early morning sun, pretending to check doors. But in daylight, it was just a parking lot again, boring, empty, lifeless. It only came out after 2. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was sleep deprived. Maybe all the caffeine and overnight hours were messing with my head. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen something real, something that didn't belong. The worst encounter came a week later, when I was heading back from Building B and saw it unfold itself from behind a compact SUV. I say unfold because that's exactly what it did. It had been crouched so low I mistook it for a shadow, until it started rising higher and higher, until it was 10 feet tall and perfectly still again. That night I stayed inside the security office until sunrise. I kept my eyes on the monitors and pretended they made me feel safer. I never saw it again after that week. Maybe it got bored, or maybe it found someone else to follow. But sometimes, when I park in dim lots late at night, I still check the mirrors, just in case that black grinning outline is waiting there, between the cars, just out of sight. Story 5. The Rocking Chair Trap. I'd been a realtor for a few years now, and most of the time it's a perfectly normal job, showing properties, smiling through awkward small talk, dodging the occasional weird client. But there's one night I still think about, one showing that went so far off the rails it made me question everything I thought I knew about this job, and about people. It was late fall, and I was showing an old farmhouse about 20 minutes outside of town. A young couple had requested a last-minute evening appointment. I wasn't thrilled about it, but the housing market was brutal, and I wasn't in a position to say no. We scheduled it for just after 8 p.m., which meant by the time I wrapped up and locked the place up, it was already pushing 9:30. The house itself was surrounded by fields and thick patches of woods. No streetlights, just the distant glow of a porch bulb and the soft rumble of crickets. The showing went fine. The couple was polite, maybe a little too quiet, but nothing strange. They didn't seem overly interested in the house, so I didn't expect them to put in an offer. I left the driveway feeling tired but relieved to be heading home. It was already dark by then, and those winding country roads have a way of feeling twice as long at night. I was thinking about dinner, what time I'd get to bed, just regular end-of-the-day stuff. Then my headlights lit something up in the Road ahead, and everything ordinary about that night slipped away in an instant. About 20 feet ahead of me, sitting dead center in the road, was a rocking chair. Just a plain wooden one, the kind you'd find on any front porch in the country. It looked old but not broken, just placed there. There were no other cars, no signs of recent activity. I slowed down, pulled to a stop, and turned on my hazard lights. I didn't want someone else to hit it, and besides, it was too large to drive around without veering into the ditch. I figured maybe someone dumped it as a prank or it fell off a truck. Leaving the engine running, I stepped out of the car. My doors automatically locked as they always did. The air was crisp and quiet, the only sound being the low hum of my hazards blinking behind me. I approached the chair slowly, using my phone's flashlight to scan around. That's when I heard it, the first twig snap off to my right. It wasn't subtle, it sounded close, maybe 10 yards into the woods. I turned toward the sound, my light catching only dense underbrush and black space between the trees. Then, another snap, this time from the left. My heart started racing. I backed up a few steps, shining the flashlight from side to side. Then I heard more movement. Footsteps, crunching leaves, more twigs breaking. And it wasn't one person, it was several. They weren't trying to be quiet anymore. I could hear branches being pushed aside, leaves being trampled, and then figures. People stepping out of the woods, slowly, silently. They were all dressed in dark clothes and ski masks. At least 7 of them, maybe more. One held what looked like an axe. Another had a bat. Others carried tools or just clenched their fists. I spun around, heart pounding, and looked back toward my car, only to see 2 more figures emerging from the trees near it, cutting off my exit. I pulled out my key fob and clicked frantically, but nothing happened. No sound, no flash of lights, no unlock. My car stayed dead and silent. Whether the battery was out or I was just too far away, I couldn't say. But I knew one thing for certain. I was trapped, and they were coming. I didn't think. I just ran. Away from the car, away from the road, away from the silent crowd of masked figures who had begun walking toward me in a slow, deliberate pace. They didn't speak. They didn't shout. Just that sound of shoes, crunching gravel, and the occasional metallic clink of whatever they were carrying. I bolted down the road, pumping my arms, heart slamming against my ribs like it was trying to escape my chest. I didn't scream, I didn't want to. Somehow screaming felt like it would make things worse. I passed the first house on the road, its porch light glowing warm and yellow. I raced up the steps and pounded on the door, yelling for help, begging for someone to open. No answer. I saw lights on inside, but no movement. I pounded again, harder, still nothing. I didn't have time to think about it. Just ran to the next house, maybe 50 yards further. Same thing, lights on, curtains open. No answer. It felt like a sick joke, like someone had gone ahead of me and warned the world not to let me in. I kicked off my heels somewhere between the second and third house. The pavement tore into my feet, but I didn't stop. I could hear them behind me now, running. Their footsteps were no longer careful. They were fast, chasing me. I veered off the road, spotting a drainage ditch partially hidden by tall grass. Without hesitation, I dove in. The concrete sides were cold and rough, maybe 4 feet deep. I pressed myself against the side, curled low, trying to silence my breathing. A branch snapped nearby, then another. The sound of shoes slowed to a walk. I could hear them talking now, but it was too muffled to make out. I covered my mouth, tears burning in my eyes. I didn't dare move. They were above me, on the road. I heard footsteps pass just feet away. Someone muttered something sharp. Clipped like an order. Another figure followed, and then more. I counted at least 6 sets of feet walking by. I stayed there long after their sounds faded. Every rustle of wind, every animal's scurry sent a fresh bolt of panic through my chest. When I finally dared to lift my head, the road was empty. My hazard light still blinked in the distance. A weak signal in the dark. I crawled out, limbs aching, and pulled out my phone with trembling hands. Dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, my voice cracked. I told her everything. 10 minutes later, I saw the red and blue lights approach. I didn't feel safe, I just felt exhausted. Like I had escaped something I wasn't supposed to survive. The police arrived quickly. 2 cruisers, lights flashing, engines idling loud against the dead silence of the road. One officer helped me out of the ditch and walked me back toward my car while the others swept the woods with flashlights and radio chatter. I told them everything I could, voice trembling, trying to remember every detail. The rocking chair was gone. The masked people were gone. My car, however, was still. There, engine running, lights blinking, and all 4 doors were suddenly unlocked. I was certain I had locked them before I stepped out. I heard them lock. I remember the solid mechanical sound of it, and the panic that hit when my key fob stopped responding. The officer shrugged, said sometimes the fob signal delays, or maybe I hit the button twice without realizing, but that didn't explain the chair, or the fact that none of the 3 houses I'd tried had anyone home, despite the lights being on. That part still eats at me. They checked those homes. Every one of them was empty, no cars in the garage, no recent activity. It was like they'd been staged to look lived in, just long enough to give me false hope. After taking my statement, the officers escorted me home. I didn't sleep that night. I spent hours replaying the chase, the footsteps, the silent faces behind the ski masks. For the next week, I didn't take any evening showings. I could barely drive without my heart, jumping at every shadow on the road. Even now, I don't trust quiet streets. I don't trust parked cars. And I sure as hell don't trust rocking chairs. Whatever happened that night wasn't random. I still feel it. Like someone had picked me. Like they're still out there, waiting for me to walk into the wrong road again. And next time they might not just watch. Story 6. The Reflective Grin in the Fog. I've always been a morning person, mostly because I've had to be. My job requires me to be on the road long before the sun's up, and I've gotten used to driving in the dark while the rest of the world sleeps. My commute isn't short either. About 45 minutes, with the first stretch being a winding 8-mile path that cuts through farmland, wooded patches and hills before it meets the highway. It's isolated, peaceful, in a way, but also unnerving at times. Even under a full moon, the trees can make it feel like you're driving through a tunnel of shadows. In March of 2023, something happened during one of those early drives that I still can't fully explain. It was a cold, heavy morning. Winter hadn't let go yet, and a thick fog had rolled in from the river valley overnight. Near my house, it was patchy, just wisps curling across the fields, but the deeper I got into the hills and the tree line, the thicker it became. My headlights barely made a dent. It was the kind of fog that made the world feel small, like you were trapped in your own bubble of light. I'd made this drive hundreds of times, knew every bend and dip in the road, so I wasn't too worried. I had my coffee, my radio, and a mental map burned into muscle memory. A few miles in, I noticed a pair of headlights in the distance behind me. Not close, not aggressive, just there. I assumed it was another commuter, someone like me, dragging themselves to work before the world woke up. But something about those lights would come to haunt me, because they didn't stay behind me for long. And I'm not sure they ever belonged to a car at all. About 5 miles into the drive, I glanced in the rear view again and noticed the headlights were gone, just vanished. No turn-offs in that section of road, no driveways, and definitely no intersections. Just trees on both sides and a few wire fences along the property lines. I slowed down slightly, scanning the fog behind me, but saw nothing. No glow, no movement. I chalked it up to them pulling off suddenly, or maybe my tired brain just missing something obvious. I turned my eyes back to the road just in time to catch something up ahead. Someone was standing on the shoulder, right near a sharp curve where the road hugs a steep ditch. The figure was still, facing away from me, wearing a reflective vest just like the ones road workers wear. I slowed to a crawl, confused. Road work at this hour? There were no signs, no cones, no equipment, and certainly no other workers. Just that one person, motionless, back turned to me. As I got closer, something began to feel off. Their posture was too rigid, like they were trying to imitate the stance of a mannequin. Their arms hung perfectly straight at their sides, feet evenly spaced, not shifting an inch. Even with my headlights on them, they didn't move. Most people would have at least turned their head or raised a hand when a car approached. But not this one. When I was about 50 feet away, that's when it happened. The head twisted around, completely around, a full 180 degrees. The body stayed still, perfectly facing away, but the head turned to look right at me. And I mean look. I saw their face, or what I think was supposed to be a face. It was stretched, almost too wide, with features that looked like they'd been rearranged, too symmetrical, too smooth. The mouth hung open as if mid-laugh, except no sound came out. I didn't think. I just hit the gas and blew past them, heart slamming in my chest, my tires kicking up gravel from the edge of the road. In the rearview mirror, I saw the figure step out into the middle of the lane, slowly, still facing away, but with that twisted head tracking me as I drove deeper into the fog. My skin crawled with a sensation I can't fully describe, like I'd been seen by something that wasn't supposed to see me back. I should have turned around. I should have driven home or straight to a police station, but something about the road ahead, something about needing to finish the drive, pushed me forward. I kept checking the mirrors, heart pounding, half expecting that twisted figure to appear again, but there was nothing for a while. Just more fog, thicker now, like a white sheet had been draped over the world. Then I saw it. Headlights. The same pair from before appearing behind me once more, as if they'd just materialized out of the fog. They were closer this time, brighter, bouncing slightly with the dips in the road, but moving strangely. I couldn't make out what kind of vehicle it was, just two piercing lights swerving slightly between the lanes, never speeding up, never slowing down. I considered pulling over to let it pass, but something told me not to. Everything in me screamed not to. I pressed harder, on the gas. The road straightened out and I pushed past 70 in a 45 zone, hoping to lose it in the open stretch. Then gone again. The headlights just disappeared like someone had flipped a switch. The silence returned, heavy and oppressive. I took a breath, trying to calm down, telling myself I'd imagined it all. That's when I saw the second figure. Another reflective vest, this time in the middle of my lane, back turned just like before. But I was going too fast to stop. I swerved hard into the opposite lane, barely missing it. As I passed, I saw its head snap around with impossible speed, mouth stretched into a grin that looked like it had been carved into the skin. Its eyes were dark, not just in color, but empty, like staring into two holes that dropped into nothing. I screamed, floored the gas, and didn't look back. But I didn't need to, because something hit my back window. Hard. A loud cracking thud that made the glass splinter like a spider web across the corner. Then came the sound. Metal scraping, long and slow, like fingernails dragging along the body of the car. I couldn't see anything through the rear view, the fog was too dense, but I felt it. Something was back there, clinging, reaching. I could hear the scraping travel from one side of the roof to the other, deliberate and slow, like it was crawling across the top of the car, trying to decide where to dig in. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, just drove. My hands were locked on the wheel, white-knuckled, and my eyes burned from not blinking. I didn't stop until I hit the first intersection with visible traffic lights, and a gas station lit up like a stadium. When I finally parked, shaking, and stepped out to check the damage, I found deep scratches in the paint around the rear window. And something else. The faint outline of 5 long fingers smudged into the frost of the glass. I sat at that gas station for at least 20 minutes, parked under the brightest lights they had. Engine running, hands gripping the steering wheel long after I'd put the car in park. People came and went, throwing glances my way, probably wondering why I looked like I'd seen a ghost. Maybe I had. Eventually, I worked up the nerve to check the rear window again. The cracks were still there, the paint still scratched. I hadn't imagined that part. I told myself, maybe it was an animal, something wild that had jumped onto the car. It was easier to believe that than the alternative. I made it to work that morning, somehow even a few minutes early. When my co-worker saw me, she asked if I was okay. I mumbled something about almost hitting a deer. Later that day, I searched online for any reports. Road work, accidents, missing persons, anything to validate what I'd experienced. There was nothing, not even a hint. For the rest of the week, I took a longer route to work, adding nearly half an hour to my already long commute. But I couldn't face that road again. Not in the dark, not with that fog. When I finally forced myself to drive it again, it was a full 10 days later. This time I left earlier, before the sun had fully set. I told myself I needed to prove it was all in my head. But that morning, something made my blood run cold. Along the roadside, where I'd seen the figures, several trees had strips of reflective tape stuck to them, placed at chest height, spaced, evenly glinting in the low light. I'd never seen them before. I checked again in the daylight later that week. They were gone. I've never seen those vests again. But sometimes in the fog, I still feel that Grin watching me from the dark. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.